Good evening, everybody. My name is Chris Roy, and on behalf of the Landmark Commission of Cleveland Heights and the Cleveland Heights Historical Society, I'd like to welcome you all here this evening. This will be the last Schoolhouse Lecture presentation of 2007, but I thought I would mention that it will not be the last historic event in Cleveland Heights of 2007. If you look either in your hands or in the seat next to you or perhaps beneath your hindquarters, you will notice a pamphlet or a flyer announcing the 4th annual benefit for the Cleveland Heights Historical Society, which will be held on November 4th at Judson Park. In addition to featuring a small chamber orchestra and tours of this historic facility, our keynote speaker will be Mr. Klaus Roy, who will be speaking on classical music in Cleveland, the Cleveland Heights Connection. I should also mention that Mr. Roy, who, although he vehemently denies it, is my father, is in the audience tonight attempting to steal whatever content he can from Marion Morton. So we hope that you will join us on November 4th. Please notice on the flyer that there is a separate number that one calls for reservations. It's not the same number that you would use to make schoolhouse reservations. But once again, it is November 4th at 7 p.m. in a beautiful auditorium in the Judson Park facility, and we hope that the great majority, if not all of you, will be able to attend. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Marion Morton, the Professor Emeritus of History at John Carroll University and an internationally known authority on the history of Cleveland Heights. Globally known. Speaking on Barometers of Change, Congregations, Houses of Worship, and Cleveland Heights. Marion?
Thanks very much. Is this mic okay?
Yep.
Sorry. Thanks for coming and thanks for inviting me again. It's always a pleasure to be here. I'm going to make a couple points first. First, this is my PowerPoint debut, so keep your fingers crossed on that one. Chris assures me that it'll work, so if it doesn't work, if it doesn't work, it isn't my fault. I want to say also that this is not a talk about theology. It is not a talk about what congregations have to say about their faith or their beliefs. It is a talk about what congregations tell us about our own community and particularly how our community has changed over time. So let me begin with a walk. From my house on Compton Road, I can walk in 5 minutes, 10 minutes, to these places. 3 synagogues, 1 conservative, 1 Orthodox, and 1 conservadox. A Greek Orthodox cathedral, a Roman Catholic church, a Disciples of Christ church, a Church of Christ, a non-denominational African American church, a Presbyterian church, and a Lutheran church. And I walk slowly. When my street was laid out in the first decade of the 20th century, none of those houses of worship and only one of the congregations, the Presbyterians, existed. So what strikes me is that these changing congregations and houses of worship reflect and measure the ways that Cleveland Heights itself has changed. Each congregation and each house of worship, if you bump that out, I'll do a bad thing to you. Each congregation and each house of worship has its own story. Together they tell the story of Cleveland Heights from its beginnings as a Protestant outpost in the heathen wilderness to its wildly various present-day Protestant, Catholic, Jewish, and non-denominational congregations of all races and creeds. I think I can best tell that story by first putting each congregation into some kind of context, and second, noting where each congregation located and what each built. And next slide, please. Oh, good. And so this first set of congregations settled here from 1875 to 1910. The players here are Fairmont or Cleveland Heights Methodist Episcopal Church, Mayfield or Cleveland Heights Presbyterian, and Noble Heights Bible Chapel. These first, all Protestant congregations, arrived in the late 19th and early 20th centuries to evangelize the heathen and convert the godless. They established near the first areas of settlement close to Mayfield Road and Euclid Avenue, where they built small country churches. These local congregations are the local versions of the energetic efforts of mainline Protestant denominations to achieve what their contemporaries called the evangelization of the world in this generation. Yes, sir? No? Okay. To achieve this, Protestants sent missionaries around the globe to Hawaii, to the Philippines, and to the Far East. And Protestants also evangelized at home. Examples of that late 19th century evangelization at home include the YMCA and the Salvation Army. Cleveland Heights' first congregations were born of this same impulse. They were mission churches of more established congregations sent out to convert the godless residents of East Cleveland Township, which was sometimes referred to as Heathen Ridge. I have never been sure exactly what heathen they had in mind. There wasn't much up here in the late 19th century. Next slide, please. Only the farms, vineyards, and quarries owned by Emil Pryor, James Haycox, whose home you see here, Seth and Marion Minor, the Compton and Silsby families. Perhaps the heathen were the property owners, or more possibly, the heathen were the men and women who worked for them. Or perhaps the heathen lived just to the west in Little Italy, the stone carvers and gardeners of Lakeview Cemetery. Most, of course, were Catholic and heathen as far as Protestants of the late 19th century were concerned. The congregations of these early Protestant mission churches were small, and funding was even smaller. So small that none of the first congregations could at first build their own churches. Instead, they met in private homes or public facilities. When they were able to build the first houses of worship, their architecture reflected these humble origins, although not their grand ambitions. For example, the first recorded congregation that I know of was established in 1875 in what was then East Cleveland Township by a group of Methodists. Best known for their enthusiastic singing and itinerant preaching, American Methodism was established in this country shortly after the American Revolution. And soon after that, the Methodist Episcopal Church sent its missionaries to the far west, including Cleveland. The first Methodist church was founded in the city of Cleveland in 1827, and congregations were soon established east of the city limits. One of them was Fairmont Methodist Episcopal Church. Next slide, please. Called Fairmont because that was the name of the post office for the neighborhood. The congregation met right here in this school building, and there we are. Those children are not necessarily Methodist. They just happen to be in school that day. The official church history referred to this area as Heathen Heights because of the disorderly weekend celebrations of the men who worked in the Haycox Quarries just to the south. Actually, we just saw a picture of the Haycox Quarries, where Kane Park is now. In 1878, the congregation built this next structure. There we go. structure just to the south of the schoolhouse, which actually you can see there to your left. So it was right there. The congregation of this little church consisted of about 50 farmers and dairymen and their families. Apparently, none of the riotous stonecutters were interested in being saved. The congregation stayed there, until 1904, when it moved north on Superior to Hampshire and changed its name to the Cleveland Heights Methodist Episcopal Church. And next slide, please. And here is its third home. It is and you recognize this? Yeah. Okay. It is a simple Gothic revival frame building, but it was designed by local architect Sidney Badgley. Badgley also did more famous churches such as Pilgrim Congregational, now Pilgrim United Church of Christ. And we will see this building and another of Badgley's buildings. Of equally humble origin, but with equally lofty determination to convert the heathen, was our second recorded congregation, a mission church of Beckwith Presbyterian Church in Cleveland. This congregation was first known as the Mayfield Heights branch of Beckwith, and it too was established in this very neighborhood in 1903. Come on in. The Mayfield Heights referred to the suburban development established by Marcus M. Brown, which is this neighborhood that we're in now. Members met first in this home, next slide please, in this home at 1757 Radnor Road. This is my only discovery of the entire talk. I knew that they met on Radnor Road. I had a picture from the church bulletin of the house, but when Dottie and I went up and down the street, we couldn't find a house that looked just like the picture. And I finally stumbled across the address almost by accident. Anyway, here is the first home of Mayfield Heights Presbyterian Church, right around the corner on Radnor Road. Frank Kane, who lived 2 doors down, became a member of this congregation. After 3 years, the congregation moved its meetings to the first floor of this schoolhouse, the Methodist having just vacated the property next door. I don't know if there's any relationship there at all. In 1908, this Presbyterian congregation moved again north to Mayfield and Pryor Road on property purchased from M.L. Pryor, originally part of his vineyard. That has to be good, doesn't it? A Methodist building a church and a vineyard. I need a warm-up act. All right, that's better. And next picture, please. I hope I have it right. Yeah. Architect Badgley also designed this structure for this congregation. And the picture is kind of cropped, so I don't have a good front view of this particular building. According to the official church history, Andrew Carnegie and John D. Rockefeller helped pay for the church's organ, although I have no idea why. Carnegie was a Presbyterian, but Rockefeller was a Baptist. The congregation's official name became the Cleveland Heights Presbyterian Church. The congregation will move and change its name again, but not for a while. The third mission church in what was now Cleveland Heights was also Presbyterian. The Presbyterians obviously were one of the first and most successful Protestant denominations to establish themselves in the Western Reserve. Cleveland's first Presbyterian church, which you probably know as Old Stone, was founded in 1820. But next slide, please. But the first Presbyterian Church of East Cleveland on Euclid Avenue was established in 1807. This church just celebrated its bicentennial. It celebrated its centennial by founding our third Cleveland Heights congregation, first known as the Noble Heights Bible Chapel, 2 miles south of the Mother Church on Noble Road. The godless heathen of this neighborhood were probably the farmers, dairymen, and stone cutters employed in the quarries of the little village of Bluestone nearby. Like the other two congregations, this one met first in a public building. Next slide, please. The Noble Road School. These children are probably not Presbyterians. They just happened to be there in the day that picture was taken. The building is just, there doesn't seem to be any objection to a church meeting in a public building either. Seems to me odd. The building is described in the official church history as a, quote, one-room stone schoolhouse with 3 windows to the side. And this has to be it. Note that this looks very much like the Superior Schoolhouse, also built by East Cleveland Township about the same time. The Noble Road Schoolhouse was torn down in 1909, and the Presbyterians built a new building just to the north of their present location. And I do not have a good picture of that building. In 1929, the congregation became independent of the parent church and assumed its present name, Noble Road Presbyterian Church. Next slide. And here come our second set of congregations who arrived between 1910 and 1950. They are located near the streetcars and the elite suburban allotments which have developed by then. And they build elegant suburban churches, mostly Gothic in style. By the time that the Noble Road Bible Chapel was established, the suburbanization of the rural outpost of Cleveland Heights was well underway. And by 1930, Cleveland Heights was essentially built out. Its initial population of about 1,500 in 1901 had escalated to almost 51,000. The city built an elegant new city hall, and the school board built elegant schools. Both suburban developers and congregations realized that churches attracted suburbanites and vice versa. Enterprising real estate entrepreneurs took advantage of this interrelationship. For example, Marcus M. Brown, the developer of Mayfield Heights, which is this area here, occasionally gave the sermon at the Cleveland Heights Methodist Church that we just saw. Patrick Calhoun, the developer of Euclid Heights, arranged for the Episcopal Church of St. Andrews to be moved into his allotment from Murray Hill. This church was later reorganized as St. Albans at Edge Hill and Overlook. Grant W. Deming's advertisements for his allotment, the first Forest Hill, boasted of the presence nearby of both the Methodists and the Presbyterians who we have already seen. Churches mean, after all, right kind of folks live here, which is right, huh? As the suburb grew, so did the congregations, and so did their budgets, and so did their buildings. The humble country churches that proselytized the heathen were replaced by elegant structures that expressed the secular and spiritual aspirations of those who worshiped there. An excellent example of this transformation is our first congregation, the Heights Methodist Episcopal Church at Hampshire and Superior. The congregation had grown to 500 by 1923 and had to hold worship services in the auditorium, Roosevelt Junior High School. Again, no problem about a church worshiping in a public building. In 1927, the congregation, next slide please, now called the Church of the Savior, broke ground for its current French Gothic Revival style building at Lee Road and Bradford, which you see here in the foreground. And of course, they're still building. This new site was just to the east of the Van Swearingen's allotment, the first Shaker Heights, that ran east and west along Fairmont from Coventry to Lee Road. At the intersection of Fairmont and Coventry, Fairmont Presbyterian was built in 1916. There. Those Presbyterians sure can build, can't they? Its original frame structures were replaced by this lovely English-style sandstone building we see here, to which many additions have been made. Next slide, please. In 1926, the congregation of St. Paul's Episcopal Church moved from their building at Euclid and East 41st, which is now the site of the Catholic St. Paul's Shrine, to its present location on the eastern boundary of B.R. Deming's Euclid Golf allotment. In this case, the suburban development predated the church, but each enhanced the beauty of the other, as they still do today. Nobody appreciated more the intimate and highly desirable connections between churches and suburban development than Father John Powers, who was both priest and suburban developer. Next. According to the official church history, Father Powers persuaded the Cleveland Catholic Diocese to lend him money not only to build St. Anne Church, but to buy surrounding properties for his would-be parishioners. The developer of record of these properties was the Meadowbrook Land Company, and its advertisements urged upwardly mobile Cleveland Catholics to buy homes near, quote, the only Catholic church in Cleveland Heights. Powers first built the recreation hall and rectory, and then the school and sanctuary in 1925. Not until 1952 would St. Anne achieve its current grandeur. The Cleveland Catholic Diocese had been frantically building churches, schools, and social service institutions since before its founding in 1847. This proliferation was inspired first by the growing number of Catholics who came to Cleveland to work on the canals, on the railroads, and in the factories, and second by the fact that these immigrants came from all over Europe. The diocese founded churches in which these newcomers could hear Mass in their own languages, spoken by a priest from their Old World homes. In 1908, there were 65 parishes in Greater Cleveland. More than 34 of them were nationality parishes, that is, parishes intended for a specific ethnic group. This meant in some neighborhoods there might be several Catholic churches. Since the 1950s, as you know, the diocese has been reaping the whirlwind of church and school building. And today, as the number of priests has diminished, as the significance of ethnic identity has dwindled, and as Catholics have joined the outmigration from Cleveland and its inner ring suburbs like Cleveland Heights, the diocese has to make, as you know, some tough choices about which of these churches to close. One of these may be St. Anne, or St. Louis, or Philomena. The three of them are clustered together. One of them will go. However, no one imagined such a thing in 1915 when Powers made the initial arrangements with the bishop. These arrangements were made in secret so as to catch unawares the Protestants of Cleveland Heights, who until then had a monopoly on saving suburban souls. By the time the Meadowbrook Land Company ads appeared, it was too late. The Catholics had successfully challenged Protestant hegemony on the Heights. And greater challenges were soon to come from our third wave of congregations. These arrived from 1924 to about 1950. I have called them newcomers and strangers in the land because they are Jewish congregations. They settle along the path of Jewish settlement from Glenville, up Superior, and up Mayfield. And they build along that route distinctive non-Anglo-American structures that altered forever the landscape and skyline of our city. By the 1920s, there was already a significant Jewish presence in Cleveland Heights. Two examples: the Mayfield Cemetery, established in 1890 by two Reformed Jewish congregations, and the Oakwood Club, founded in 1905. Both were the creations of Cleveland's Jewish elite, who had established elegant temples in Cleveland's Central and Glenville neighborhoods, and who were themselves headed for the suburbs. These Jewish families, often listed in Cleveland's Blue Book, settled in Cleveland Heights' fanciest neighborhoods. As far as I know, there was little negative response to this initial in-migration. Who could object to Samuel and Salmon Halley, owners of Cleveland's most exclusive department store, living next door? And only old people remember Halley's department store. However, the second influx of Jews, much larger and from middle-class backgrounds, was a different story. For example, the initial response to the in-migration of B'nai Yeshurun, did I do it right? Yeah, okay, congregation, which moved to Cleveland Heights from East 55th and Scoville in the central neighborhood. Next slide, Chris. Oh, sorry. Okay. Shortly after these dignified folks broke ground in 1924, the developer of the property across the street, John D. Rockefeller Jr., made them an offer they almost couldn't refuse. A much larger piece of property on Superior Road to the west of where the community center is today, in exchange for this property at Mayfield and Lee. Rockefeller apparently believed that a large Jewish temple would detract from his planned residential development of the second Forest Hill allotment. Construction of this new temple actually halted until the land swap fell through, and the building of what became Temple on the Heights resumed. Across the nation, the 1920s were years of racial and religious intolerance, and we have our local versions of that here. One is Rockefeller's effort to buy out Temple on the Heights. Another example, in spring of 1924, 10 Cleveland Heights Protestant congregations instituted a program that allowed students to be excused from 1 hour of public school a week to attend classes in religious education in nearby churches. The school board okayed the agreement despite vigorous protests from Rabbi Silver and Catholic Bishop Schrems, who argued, as we might today, that the arrangement violated the separation of church and state. Yet neither this resistance nor the Depression halted the swift emigration of Jews out of Cleveland into Cleveland Heights. In 1937, Jews constituted approximately 29% of Cleveland families. Jews were heavily concentrated in the apartments, duplexes, and single homes close to Jewish institutions along Mayfield, east to Taylor and south on Taylor and Coventry. In 1940, Cleveland Heights was the second largest Jewish neighborhood in the Cleveland area after Glenville. And the greatest suburban migration would come during and after World War II. That war, fought in part against Nazi Germany, helped to create a political and moral climate in which public expressions of anti-Semitism were less acceptable. There was gradual acceptance of Jewish institutions in Cleveland Heights, at least if they were built in already Jewish neighborhoods. This acceptance is illustrated in the eastward migration of Congregation Ash Emeth from Glenville in 1942. In that year, the congregation purchased at auction the property of the bankrupt Park School on Mayfield, just east of the Temple on the Heights. In 1946, the congregation hired internationally known architect Erich Mendelsohn, a refugee himself from Nazi Germany, to design a building for them on that site. 250 neighbors, most of them from my own street of Compton. I see three other Compton people here. Petitioned the Cleveland Heights Planning and Zoning Commission to reject the new structure. Significantly, the commission ignored the neighbors and approved the synagogue's request. Next slide, please. Mendelsohn then created for the congregation the most dramatic modern building in the suburb, according to Ken Goldberg anyway, and perhaps in all of greater Cleveland. Like B'nai Yeshurun, the congregation adapted its name and became Park Synagogue, one of the largest conservative congregations in the United States. The late Judah Rubinstein, the preeminent historian of the Cleveland Jewish community, estimated that in 1944, 27,000 Jews lived in Cleveland Heights. This estimate, and all numbers about religious affiliation are pretty much estimates. This estimate would make Jews almost 1/2 of the suburb's population. The most visible of these were the Orthodox Jews, who arrived in Cleveland Heights during and after the war. Their unconventional dress and their clustering together in neighborhoods within walking distance of their shuls made them highly visible and highly suspect to non-Jews, as well as to more Americanized conservative reform and non-observant Jews. And when the Orthodox congregation Oheb Zedek wished to move from Glenville into Cleveland Heights, city officials stalled the building of its new synagogue on Taylor Road for 2 years. Next slide, please. And when it finally moved in 1951, this handsome building, as you know, became Taylor Road Synagogue. Despite this lukewarm reception, the Orthodox continued to arrive, and Cleveland Heights became the new center of communal life for Cleveland's Orthodox and conservative Jews. Along Taylor Road, there developed a very significant concentration of Jewish institutions, some of which are still there. Next slide, please. The fourth chapter of our story takes place between 1950 and 1980. Here are the players, all Protestant churches. They settle farther north and east in the suburb, reflecting the movement of population north and east as the automobile replaced the streetcar. And they locate their churches, interestingly, I think, on the borders of, or on the sites of Cleveland Heights' great mansion or estates, pretty much signaling the end of Cleveland Heights as an enclave for the very wealthy. I have called this almost back to the past because what these churches build are colonial revival structures, which we'll see in a minute. Not yet. A resurgence of interest in Orthodox Judaism in the post-war period was symptomatic of a broader religious revival that also engaged American Catholics and mainline Protestant denominations. Although critics questioned the depth of this renewed commitment to organized religion, it nevertheless impelled members of all faiths to join or rejoin their congregations. The growth of these congregations, combined with significant outmigration from city to suburbs, inspired a new wave of church synagogue and temple building in American suburbs, including Cleveland Heights. In 1953, for example, the Sun Press boasted of $10 million worth of construction for 14 new churches and temples or additions to existing structures. Social critics of the time have also commented on the conformity of American culture in post-war American suburbia. Although today we may pride ourselves in Cleveland Heights on our diversity, what strikes me about these post-war churches is their architectural uniformity, their effort to conform to the new post-war housing. And this new housing was pretty uniformly colonial revival. For example, next slide, please. Here's the post-war version of Noble Road Presbyterian Church, dedicated in 1951. This larger church reflects a larger congregation and the post-war development of this neighborhood in the northeast section of town. Next slide, please. Another example, our old friend Heights Presbyterian Church, which has moved from Pryor and Mayfield to Monticello and Lee at one corner of Rockefeller's Forest Hill allotment. The congregation purchased the property from the Rockefellers, who had set it aside for a community church. Recognizing, as had earlier developers, the churches attract home buyers. The Presbyterians sold their old buildings to a Jewish congregation and broke ground for this new home in 1950. On the northeasternmost boundary of the Rockefeller development was established, next slide please, Hope Lutheran Church in 1951. There were already 4 Lutheran churches in Cleveland Heights in 1951. Grace Lutheran, First English Lutheran, Messiah Lutheran, and Gethsemane Evangelical Lutheran Church. Like other Protestants, like Catholics, like Jews, Lutheran congregations were differentiated in part by theology and ritual, and in part by their ethnic origins. First English Lutheran, for example. Hence the proliferation of Lutheran churches and schools. And shortly after Hope Lutheran was built, Lutherans built Bethlehem Lutheran, which I think is Swedish, and Lutheran East High School on the former site of the Glen Allen Estate. Just across Yellowstone from Lutheran East High School, next slide, please. Oh, this is, oh, I didn't switch it. Yeah, there we go. Just across Yellowstone from Lutheran East High School, Euclid Avenue Christian Church built this handsome colonial structure on Mayfield Road. This Disciples of Christ congregation was established in 1843. It is an offshoot of Franklin Circle Disciples of Christ Church. Although the disciples founded fewer churches than Presbyterians or Methodists, their distinguished members included President James Garfield and Mayor Tom L. Johnson. Euclid Avenue Christian Church moved from, let's see if we can get this, no, back one. There we go. Whew. Moved from this distinguished home on Euclid Avenue, which they refer to as the Greenstone Church. You recognize this. That stunning greenstone exterior stands in really startling contrast to the Cleveland Clinic building, which stands right behind it. The startling contrast also between the new and the old church. It would be hard to imagine any two buildings more different. Illustrates the post-war admiration for colonial revival architecture, as well as a trend towards simplicity and perhaps greater economy in post-war suburban church design. This Euclid Avenue building is now the home of an African-American congregation, East Mount Zion Baptist Church. And speaking of Baptist, last but by no means least, the Baptist of Cleveland Heights. Yeah, we need to go 2 more. There we go. Thank you. In the 1920s, there were more Baptist churches in Cleveland than any other denomination. And like other denominations, Baptists began to move to the suburbs in the 1920s. The closest example is First Baptist Church on Fairmount Boulevard. That is actually in Shaker, so we can't claim it as our own. In 1954, however, Cedar Hill Baptist built this simple brick structure on the former site of the enormous mansion built for Patrick Calhoun, developer Patrick Calhoun. Note the truncated steeple here, which is the most prominent colonial feature. After Calhoun's bankruptcy, the property was sold to Dr. George Cryle. After Cryle died, his widow tried to sell the huge home to Orthodox Jews in 1943 for a rabbinical college. The neighbors were having none of it. This congregation, which was formerly Huff Avenue Baptist Church, was much more to their liking. Today, Baptists and Lutherans each have 5 houses of worship in Cleveland Heights. As far as I know, they are tied for first place in the church building category. Next slide, please. 1980 to 2007. Boy, what happened to those years? The times just keep on changing, don't they? Since 1960, Cleveland Heights' population has declined from almost 62,000 to just under 50,000 in the year 2000, the most recent year that I have any numbers for. The population, as you know, has also become multiracial. The causes of the population decline are several. These include smaller family size and the out-migration into suburbs farther east. The most visible and painful effect may be the closing of some of our public schools. Since the 1960s, the membership of the mainline Protestant denominations, Presbyterians, Methodists, Episcopals, Disciples of Christ, American Baptists, Lutherans, has also declined nationally. Although these are still by far the largest of the Protestant denominations, the fastest growing denominations have been newer, more theologically conservative congregations, and those are not my words, those are the words I stole from the history book I was using. Congregations like the Assemblies of God and the Church of God. Cleveland Heights congregations and houses of worship continue to reflect these local and national changes. The closings of at least 2 mainline Protestant churches, the outward migration of Jewish congregations, and the in-migration of small, new Protestant and African American congregations. Some of Cleveland Heights' newest congregations, like its very oldest congregations, make use of older buildings. Next slide. Oh, it's blurry. This is St. Albans and Edge Hill Community Church. When the original St. Albans burned down, it was rebuilt, and initially shared the new building with a Reformed Jewish congregation, and then with Edge Hill Community Church. This congregation is a member of the Worldwide Church of God, a new denomination reformed in the 1980s from a church born in the 1930s. They describe themselves as evangelical and believers in the literal reading of the Bible. Next slide, please. This church, Cleveland Heights Church, meets in the India Community Center, a center which, of course, reflects the multiracial character of today's Cleveland Heights. This congregation itself is non-denominational. They are also, according to their own website, literal readers of the Bible. And like the early Protestant missionaries to Cleveland Heights, they are great proselytizers. They have probably come to your door, they have come to mine, and that's where I got this nice picture. Other examples of new congregation that share old spaces. No. An African American congregation that meets on Sunday at Park Synagogue, and the New Song Ministry, which meets at Lutheran East High School. Due to dwindling membership, some churches have closed, and these buildings have found new secular uses. Next. Okay, one more. There we go. And here's the most stunning example of a beautiful, beautiful building which has found a new and beautiful, beautiful use. And 2 of those units are still for sale, ladies and gentlemen. Get your wallets out. Go down and buy me one. When this First English Lutheran Church disbanded in 2002, it sold this building to a developer and gave away the money, I believe, Reverend? Yes. Gave away the money for the sale of the building to its favorite charities. Next slide, please. You may have seen a picture of this on the front page of the Sun Press this morning. This Presbyterian congregation also disbanded very recently, and this building is now the Heights Youth Center and is used by hundreds of children after school and during the summer. Next, please. And changing and changing. And here's some examples that sum up my message. The changing houses of worship chart and measure the changing populations of our community. Next slide, please. Here's the third home of our earliest congregation, the Methodists, who sold this building to the Church of the Brethren, which in turn sold the building to this African American congregation in 1982. This is the first African American congregation in Cleveland Heights, as far as I know. Next slide. This is First Temple on the Heights. We saw their groundbreaking in 1924. In 1980, this Jewish congregation moved to Pepper Pike. This splendid building, with its dome now under repair, is home to this non-denominational African American church. Next slide, please. This was originally the building of Messiah Lutheran Church at DeSoto and Berkeley. As the Taylor Road neighborhood changed, however, Messiah Lutheran moved east on Mayfield, and the structure was purchased in the 1950s by Sinai Synagogue, which added a colonial revival entrance just to fit in with the other colonial revival churches. When Sinai Synagogue moved, Congregation Bethel purchased the building, removed the colonial revival entrance, and received a community improvement award last year for that. Next slide. And here's the building that says it all. This building on Washington Boulevard was built in 1928 by Trinity Congregational Church. 20 years later, the building was purchased by a Jewish congregation, a spin-off of Temple on the Heights. In 2000, Community Temple moved east and sold the Protestant, then Jewish structure to this non-denominational African American congregation. And last slide, please. And in conclusion, here we are back at the beginning of our story, in the first recorded house of worship of our first recorded congregation. Each of these congregations has its own story. I have mentioned throughout several of the church histories that have been written, and the last thing I want to do tonight is to urge you to write the history of your own congregation, leave it here in this wonderful repository so that in 10 years somebody can update the story of our community. That's it.
Questions for Ms. Morton?
I didn't mention everybody's church, I'm sorry.
A very recent thing, you know, the Barometers Temple on Lancashire was built in 1853.
Right, very right.
And by 1970, the Italians had taken it over.
Right, I
And
love
they
it.
moved, as a second generation moved from UK Center to Newport.
Yeah, it's really fun to watch these move because they really do chart the in and out migration. I knew that, but it's hard to get a picture of that too because of that. I tried many times, you can't get that front, but the Jewish symbols are still in front. Yeah.
We took 10 or 12 years to take down the inscription, very simple.
Oh, yeah, so, could you, okay, yeah. Yeah, I saw, yeah.
Tell us about your books. I bought one of them recently at Morton. Tell us about the other one. We have the 2 books.
I have 2 books, one with a lot of words and one with a lot of pictures. Well, let's see. The first one is called The Making of an Urban Suburb, and I think it must be 5 years old by now. Am I right? Something like that. And it sold very well, and so well that the publisher asked me if I wanted to do a second one, and that one is primarily pictures. Most of this talk comes out of that second book, actually, because I had the pictures, and because as I described the neighborhoods, what always interested me were the institutions that often anchored those neighborhoods, and those were often churches. So thanks for asking. Yeah, yeah.
This is not a congregation, but I'm always shocked every time I pass Beaumont
Yeah.
to see that chapel we have there.
Yeah. Well, don't look at me. I wasn't on Landmark Commission when they okayed that.
I had just joined the Landmark Commission. I had no idea what I was doing.
It looks like that.
Actually, I have to mention that my brother-in-law refers to that structure as the Church of the Divine Conehead.
So the same architect that did the addition to the Natural History Museum.
Yeah, it must have been. The planetarium.
Yes.
The Christian Century, which is sort of the Protestant Time magazine, just did an article on the youth club at the
Over the other.
So that got national coverage.
Yeah, it's gotten a lot of local coverage, and I don't know whether the Christian Century knows this, but that youth center is operating with a conditional permit from the city of Cleveland Heights, and that one of the conditions is that the children from other cities do not use that. So the law director is looking at that right now. That'd be too bad.
What they had done was adapted an article David Briggs did in PD.
Yeah.
You mentioned it. And you said that the Heights Youth Center, and that meets at Coventry School. And this is the Heights.
What did I say? Did I say that? Heights,
You said a center.
Heights Youth Club?
Small after school.
Yes, that's right. Right. You're right. Heights. I did call it the Heights Youth Center. My bad. It's the Heights Youth Club. Yeah. It's a local branch of the Boys and Girls Club. Yeah.
The board, I mean, the building went to, Presbyterian, everything has to be proper in order. Okay, the Presbyterians that had the building from Heights went to the Presbyterian. And then, I guess the Fairmont was most.
Yes, I think so. Yeah. And very nice, too. If you've been inside, very handsome. And I do apologize. It's a local branch of the National Boys and Girls Club, and so to call it the center is incorrect.
congregation meeting in a school, it's the New Song Church. They met in Canterbury School for, I don't know, maybe 10 years. Used to live next
Yeah.
across the street.
Yeah, I guess there isn't any objection to a religious body using a public school. I actually thought they had met in Fairfax, but, no. Was it Canterbury? Okay. John?
What was the demise of the structure that was over here? Is there any remnant of it left?
I think Kara said the foundations or pieces of foundation are still over there. You can see there's a space there. And I don't know when it went down either.
Raised or?
I would assume, yeah. Looks very small. Ellie?
Do you know when Bethel Church was built, and was it, since it's right next to, well,
Noble Road. Wait.
Severance Estate, was it one of those churches that hung on the big estate thing?
Bethlehem Lutheran? Is it Bethlehem Lutheran? Bethlehem Lutheran. It's 1950 something. It's right after Hope Lutheran, I think. I think I just said that. There's also a Bethel Baptist on Noble Road. You don't mean that, though? No. No, that whole area around the former Severance Estates gets built up just around the same time. Yeah. Yeah.
You mentioned that so many of the churches are in colonial style. Could you tell us a little bit more about architecture?
Oh,
Of this
okay.
area?
That was the question I was hoping nobody would ask me.
When you look, for example, at the Church of the Savior, that's supposedly French Gothic.
Right.
Has anybody come up with any ideas for new architectural style?
Well, there's the Beaumont Chapel. I mean, that's an honest question. I don't know. That's the only example of new ecclesiastical architecture that I can think of. Most Christian buildings, anyway, are Gothic in some way, shape, or form. And there are variations on that. I see somebody taking exception.
The new St. Albans was built in a
Right. Yes. Thank you.
that the neighbors didn't like.
Yeah, of course. That's what neighbors do. Right. Well, if you remember the old one was very traditional, stucco exterior, very English, right out of the English cottage setting, which was the idea. It was an Anglican church, so naturally you would expect it to look like an Anglican church. Yeah.
Why did Euclid Avenue Christian Church keep its name if it moved off of Euclid Avenue?
That's a good question. The other churches did not, by and large. You know, why didn't Cedar Hill stay Huff Avenue? Well, I guess that's a silly question. But Euclid Avenue has a certain panache. And I suppose keeping the name would allow the congregation to retain some of its identity. It's a beautiful. Anybody ever been in the East Mount Zion? The beautiful green stone building with a wonderful stained glass. Have you ever been inside? Yeah. No, you should go. Regina, yeah.
What about storefront churches or churches in households?
Most churches leave very few records. I'm lucky to have anything at all. Currently, there's a Jewish congregation that meets we're Mekong River in that building there. But I think that there's probably some zoning that precludes that. And that little bill, no, wouldn't preclude, no. That's the only one I can think of right at the top of my head. Yep.
What happened to the building at Pryor?
I'm sorry.
What happened to the building?
At Pryor and Mayfield. It became a Jewish congregation, and they moved, and I don't remember the date, right at the, I don't know. Must be, Ian, do you know?
I don't know when, but wasn't that where Jaguar Cleveland ended up?
Yes, where Jaguar. No, that's her congregation. No. I don't know, but it would be easy to find that out by finding the demolition permit at City Hall or online.
I think one of the 60s, maybe we Mayfield Heights. One of the 60s.
In the 60s, Ken says, moved to Mayfield Heights. Yeah, that's right. It's Gates of Hope, or say Sherry Tikva.
Yeah, Sherry. It became Mayfield Hillcrest. And a land, and then moved to Beechwood.
Yeah, Sue.
When Trinity Congregational left that spot, they went to Pepper Pie,
That's right, they did.
and then they eventually sold to a Jewish congregation.
Yes.
I don't know where they've gone.
Yeah, I don't know where they went either, but that Jewish congregation moved right into that, I hate to say it, colonial structure, the steeple and, yeah. Because,
I believe they folded with Pepper Pie.
oh,
I say, I believe it folded.
oh, okay. Yes.
No, it became a synagogue.
The Cleveland Clinic has been trying for years
To buy that?
to buy that land at the Mount Zion
I don't know.
without success.
I don't know.
They're on the registry. I think about
Good.
20 years ago, 15 or 20 years ago, they got historic places.
I have no idea. Anybody else? We done? Okay, thank you very much.